On the night of Friday, June 6, 1986 at 8 p.m., life in Hollywood, California went on as usual. People were out and about. Fun was had. Something you didn't expect to hear, though, was the bank alarm that went off at the First Interstate Bank of Hollywood. Police were called out to the bank and arrived quickly, ready to take a bank robber into custody. But when they got there, the building was empty and there were no signs of forced entry. It was a false alarm. The company was notified of a faulty alarm, and the police went about their business. The employees had complained of a faulty alarm throughout the previous week. Apparently it had gone off at random and had to be shut off. This, combined with a power outage, was enough to satisfy the officer who showed up that night that nobody was trying to break in. So nobody thought much about it when the alarm went off on Friday night. Monday morning, the staff arrived to open the bank as usual. They went about their checklist, which included opening the vault. What they saw when they did so was shocking. It was empty. All of the money, valuables, and rare coins were gone. And there was a hole in the floor. It took a moment to grasp what the person opening the bank was looking at. They had been robbed, but in a way that you would expect to see in a cartoon. The police were called and the manager was notified. When the police arrived, they confirmed that a robbery had, in fact, obviously taken place. They were very interested in the hole in the floor. Further investigation into it found something interesting. Under the city of Hollywood, there exists a large system of storm drains. It is somewhat of a complicated highway system for water when it comes. The robber had used this system to his or to her advantage. The hole in the vault connected to a handmade 4.5 foot by 3.5 foot tunnel dug from these storm drains directly under the bank vault. The tunnel was 95 feet long and began at a nearby street. They had then used electric tools to finish the job, cutting through 18 inches of concrete and steel to find himself in the bank vault. The power outage reported in the previous week was likely due to the robbers tapping into the electrical grid to power their tools. The bank manager had even called security to report a light grinding sound coming through the walls, but it was written off to rats. On top of this, the precision necessary for such a task is daunting. You would have had to have the distance measured out precisely. If he had drilled slightly in a different place, he would have come up through the floor of the lobby. It was determined by investigators that he had likely planned to execute the robbery over Memorial Day weekend, when the bank staff would have been gone for an extra day. But based on the markings on the vault, it was determined that the electric drill had gone out on them, and they spent the next week doing the job by hand. What's more, when the tunnel was evaluated by experts, it was determined to have been expertly and safely dug. Whoever was responsible, they knew what they were doing. Likely they had a job that required work like this. The entrance to the tunnel used to rob the bank had been covered with plywood and mortar every time they were finished for the day, and nobody who happened to be walking that way would ever suspect anything. Around 3,000 cubic feet of dirt would have been moved during the making of the tunnel. Whoever did this, it took months. This was called the crime of the century by many. Nobody saw this coming because nobody ever expected anybody to rob a bank from inside of the vault. Investigators took this crime very seriously. It made a mockery of the Hollywood Police Department, and they, frankly, didn't appreciate it. The tunnels were searched meticulously in a 3-mile radius of the bank, but not a single piece of evidence was turned up. Not one clue pointed to anything, let alone the identity of the perpetrator. All that was left was empty styrofoam coffee cups used by the perpetrators during the crime. It seemed as though whoever did this had committed the perfect crime. But would lightning strike twice? Yes and no, it turns out. 14 months after the first robbery, on August 22nd, 1987, the alarm at the Bank of America, Los Angeles, rang out through the night. Police responded immediately. They stood at the ready as the assistant manager opened the vault for them, but it was the same story. An 18-inch hole in the floor was to be found. But this time, they had been interrupted and stopped halfway through the robbery when the manager had originally begun to open the bank vault after the alarm had gone off. She had missed the robbers by a matter of seconds, and they had only made off with $90,000 this time and left the remainder behind. How were the men so familiar with the terrain they were working with? They had to not only know exactly how far to dig down to the inch, but they would also need to know what was buried where they were digging and try to avoid running into anything unpleasant or that would hinder them. Not to mention that this tunnel would also have taken several weeks to dig, at least. How long had they been up to this? This tunnel was a bit more negotiable than the previous one. It was 5 feet high, 8 feet wide, and used wooden beams to support it. This tunnel originated from the sewer and extended about 60 feet into the vault. Along with the majority of the contents of the bank vault, they also left behind other things. The tools they had been using, for example, were left on the floor of the vault, as well as some work clothes. Also left behind was an 18-inch core bit, used by construction crews to bore holes through cement. This was good news for the investigators. This part was traceable. And trace it they did. It was purchased in the San Francisco Bay Area by a fake construction company that claimed to work out of San Diego. But the purchase was made in cash. It was a dead end for investigators. Police searched the area once again, but the criminals had mostly picked up after themselves and left no clues. But something important was left behind. About 3 miles from the tunnel, a 4-wheel drive quad runner was discovered hidden inside a storm drain entrance. It would make sense that they were using equipment such as this. The drill press that needed to be used with their equipment weighed over 100 pounds. It was not easily maneuverable by hand. The tunnel from the bank vault indicated that the men worked without shoes. There were at least 2 of them. Likely there were 3, as they would require an outside source to tell them that the alarm had gone off. There was a single fingerprint recovered from the quad runner. It was compared to known criminals on record, but no matches returned. Police also turned up something far more helpful. A tunnel already finished and ready to go, ending under a Beverly Hills bank. This heist would have given them $10 to $20 million. Everything was in place and ready to go for this robbery. When they traced the purchase of the quad runner, they discovered that it was made by a man calling himself David or Robert Spaulding. It was an amusing joke to police officers, since the first robbery had taken place on Spaulding Avenue. Even though there was no doubt that David Spaulding was not a real name, the shop owner was able to give a description of 4 muscular white males in their early 30s, dressed in construction attire who spoke English. This was helpful to police and gave them a direction to look. They were also described as having a military sense about them. A composite sketch was made of one of these men. The second and third bank robberies were likely meant to have been executed at the same time, and would have made this one of the most prosperous bank robberies of all time. The newspapers would dub them the Hole in the Ground Gang. As apt as that title was, it was soon replaced by the Burrowing Burglars. It's catchy. Regardless of what you call them, they were never caught, and no more robberies occurred. Likely they were put off after coming moments from being caught with their final robbery. The statute of limitations has run out on this case. Any of these men could walk into the police station, confess their crime, and go home free. It is certainly possible that all of the robbers are still alive. They might be listening to this show right now and reliving the good old days. It might even be you.